Forum Borealis. Paradigm Expansion.
Greetings from the north, all citizens of the globe. Welcome to the forum. Tonight we will look into the power elite and some of their main institutions, apart from the obvious Pentagon, Washington and the alphabet soup of American intel agencies. Obviously it's a gigantic field, so we'll but scratch the surface, in particular deal with the Bilderberger conferences, NATO and the European Union. In the future we'll shed much more light on the globalist oligarchs and their multinational corporations that, unbeknownst to a large segment of the population, has almost taken over the Western democracies and turned them into fascist corporatism, or the Fourth Reich, if you like. Indeed, as you will see, the collapse of the Third Reich was a foundation for the current status quo. Thus, we're moving on in our timeline of the breakaway Civ series from World War II and up today. Our guest is optimal to account for this, as he is one of the world's foremost experts on many of these elements dealt with. I'm of course referring to Tony Gosling, a British land rights activist, historian and investigative journalist. He attended the Ilkley College in West Yorkshire with a humanities degree specializing in English literature from Bradford University. After working a few years in the family aviation business, he went into radio journalism. He worked for the BBC between 86 and 87 as Director General Scrutineer. Between 87 and 89, worked for the strategic intelligence and advisory firm Hakluyt and Company as customer role-playing manager, then moved on to Radio Thamesmed, now Time FN 106.8, in London as editor of community programs, until RTM got purged for quality journalism by the Suits in 91. Between 89 and 93 he was back at BBC for a researcher's job and received full BBC legal broadcast training. During this time he worked for different BBC outlets as a researcher, reporter, relief presenter, radio journalist and documentary maker. When BBC got slaughtered in 93, he moved to Oxford and between 95 and 99 was involved with environmental campaigning at The Land Is Ours, working as national coordinator and office manager into the late 90s. After moving to Bristol and committing further to investigative journalism, he established Eye Contact Video Network and Eco-Village Network UK. Gosling spent a year on the national executive of the National Union of Journalists, 8 years as their secretary and also vice chair of the Bristol branch. Between 05 and 06 he was public relations officer for South West Trades Union Congress. Between 06 and 07 Public Relations Officer for Avon Fire and Rescue. Between 09 and 10, he was choice-based lettings consultee for Bristol City Council. Between 11 and 15, he was resident board member for Nightstone Housing Group. Since 09, he's been working for Bristol Community FM, where he produces and presents Friday Drive Time, its weekly politics show, accessed online at thisweek.org.uk. Since 13, he's been working as an investigative journalist for Press TV and as a columnist and regular news contributor for RT, doing reports on international affairs including the anti-democratic influence of banks, royalty and corporations. He remains an investigative journalist for Bilderberger.org and also regularly posts material to radio4all.net. You will also find his work at public-interest 911forum.co.uk, 911forum.org.uk, and politicsthisweek.wordpress.com. Tony Gosling first discovered the Bilderberger group during the 1990s and became increasingly incredulous at the extent of the news blackout as his research confirmed its existence, so he bought Bilderberg.org domain where he started his exposé of them. Over the last 20 years, he's kept exposing the secret power of the Bank for International Settlements and the Bilderberger elite, where the dark forces of corporations, media, banks and royalty collude to accumulate wealth and power through extortion and war. He's been booted for telling the truth, has had his life threatened by the extremist terrorists known as Jewish Defense League, been harassed and arrested, and had property such as computers and contacts lists seized by the police, only to have all charges dropped after damage done. Yet he remains a politically active broadcaster both through radio and internet, and as a fierce and principled activist spends his life advocating solutions, such as a press which reflects the concern of the public rather than attempting to manipulate opinion, sensationalize or dump down. On the spiritual side, he belongs to the pious idealists called the Religious Society of Friends, better known as Quakers, which is consistent with his anti-corpocracy stance, even within the religious field. And today, he will scratch the surface of the corpocracy, briefing us on how they rig the system against you to benefit their fascist oligarchy. Now, a couple of quick warnings. First, as a radio host, he recorded on his part, which explains why the unusual turning of tables where he conducts a brief interview of me. Second, there is a little trouble with the sound on Tony's part, especially early on in the show, but nothing so serious that you can't make out the gist of the conversation. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Forum Borealis, Tony.
Hello, Alf.
So happy to have you on board.
Hi.
By the way, do you know who recommended you?
Nope.
Well, it's your old colleague, Lawrence Demello.
Okay.
Yes, we had her on.
Okay, so the difficulty Lawrence has is because she's from a different world, really. She was working, as I understand it, on Discovery Channel back in the days when they used to tell the truth. And it's like me in a weird way.
Exactly.
Working for the BBC in the days when, you could sit in front of a BBC microphone or camera and tell the truth. Nowadays, if there's anything really which comes close to scratching any power, the real power behind the scenes, then you'll find your whole appears underneath you. You disappear rather quickly. There are very, very strict lines about things what you can and cannot say now. Yeah. And that, I think, started in the late 1980s with the sacking of Alistair Milne, who was the BBC Director General, whose son is now advising Jeremy Corbyn, and he's a Guardian columnist, Seamus Milne. And slowly, I was actually working for the BBC in 1989, 1991, 92, 93, and I could see the changes going on in the newsrooms, in the production offices where...
Well, hang on, was this under Blair?
No, this is before Blair.
Even before Blair?
Yeah, this would be the major government. And but I mean, the thing is, this was almost completely irrelevant which government it was. What happened was the soul of the BBC had been ripped out when the Thatcher government had gotten rid of Alistair Milne. They put instead in his place the BBC's chief accountant as the creative director of the corporation, and it really has been downhill ever since, slowly but surely. The City of London interests. And I say that because Victor Rothschild was very much involved in getting rid of the Director General in 1987, and that's proven in the memoirs of Marmaduke Hussey, who the chairman of the BBC at the time. He said, I mean, this was the guy who said to me, Victor Rothschild said to me, can you get rid of the Director General of the BBC? And the direction actually came from Victor Rothschild to the chairman of the BBC. So anyway, from that time onwards, the BBC has been going downhill. Yeah. And like I said, I could remember seeing these kind of peculiar characters who seemed to be not the sort of person that you would want to go out to lunch or for a drink after work with, appearing in the production offices, who were sort of sinister with their own agendas, where they were cold. And so there was a whole change in the ethos of the staff going on whilst I was there, and a lot of nepotism. So in other words, people were getting promoted because of who they knew, sometimes because of who they were sleeping with. And that culture wasn't there in 1989 when I first started. It really was, the people were holding that back, and it was all about, what have you actually done in terms of good creative work, award-winning, courageous journalism. And I could see that being whittled away over the 3 or 4 years I was there.
No doubt. We're going to have a series on today's shamestream media, and we're going to try make people understand, because BBC, like you say, is still living off the old name that they had in their old days.
Well, they certainly try to.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say many anyway, people who class as elderly people, a lot of them have seen the changes. Yep. What the mass media does nowadays is it provides a kind of comfort blanket for people that don't want to think, people that want to believe that everyone is kind of nice and fluffy and friendly, and that wars are something that's far away and will never happen to them, and anyway it's just unfortunate, but really people are kind of good-natured, and that the people who think like that are massaged by the mass media. And anybody who really starts to expose the truth about what's really going on, who's really running things, is not welcome at these big institutions now, and frowned on, and it's almost like a kind of dog whistle, the way that you don't actually hear it, but everybody knows what you can say and what you can't say, that they're really part of an empire, and that empire is doing good things. And if you start to question it too much, obviously there's got to be a tiny bit of questioning to have a bit of credibility at all, but start to ask any of the really awkward questions, like for example about what's the involvement of these most powerful people in the Western world, the Bilderbergers, getting together every year, and in between times Kissinger, various other war criminals, Tony Blair, going to these meetings. What is their influence? We saw actually nothing whatsoever in any of the broadcast media in the UK. I'm not sure about elsewhere, of the recent Bilderberg meeting in Switzerland.
We'll get to that. But
what I want to make the point here is that it's what they don't say, which is important. So they'll talk about any kind of silly stuff, but the really important stuff they just simply will not mention it. It really is taboo. And that's the thing that I think has really changed over the years, because even in the 1960s and 70s, you get the odd article about the Bilderberg. The 1960s, things would appear, but there's been nothing in any of the newspapers, and they'll just feed you stuff to keep you entertained, really.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
So,
but let's see.
Before we start, can I just ask you, are we recording here, Dave? Because we can just do a little plug for you and your program.
Sure.
Can you just introduce yourself and tell us what you do there and where you are?
Yeah.
Cool.
So they call me Al Borealis. We're a podcast stationed in Norway, but our reach is global, obviously. We do anything within science, history, culture, philosophy, especially taking on subversive guests, power critics.
That's good.
Try to have sober people, academics, journalists, but anyone who really deserves a voice. We try to give voice to more voiceless in today's media. And we have no taboos. We have no content limits. We try to explore the obscure and.
I mean, one of the problems with that sort of list of topics is quality control, isn't it? Because sometimes you've got, deliberate deceptions mixed in with obscure truths. And I mean, it's probably fair to say that there's still quite a lot of effort goes into controlling history, and there's some fascinating episodes in history which haven't been exposed. But in order to discredit people, what often happens is that deliberate deceptions put out. So how do you avoid those?
Well, I just have to use my common sense. That's why I wouldn't have on David Icke, although he's done a lot of, should I say, rebellious stuff. I don't trust him as a source because he has tainted his own info with a lot of lunacy. So you just have to, I mean, that's the thing with podcasts. You will find anything out there, and the Overton window, will be different on each one. So for us, for me, it's important that people can document their stuff. That is not just claims. If they can, welcome on board.
So whereabouts do we find you online?
So we are big on YouTube, but we're also on all the mainstream podcast platforms. And we're going to emigrate to Minds very soon, which hopefully will take over for YouTube and Facebook.
Does it bother you that you're part of the Eric Schmidt, Google, Facebook, YouTube empire?
Not morally, but it bothers me in practice because these days every second show becomes demonetized and even shadow banned because we don't cater to the limits they impose upon us when we do shows. We just do try to cover honestly what we think is important, and then it ends up being demonetized or shadow banned. So that's a bother.
Well, yeah. So where are you?
I'm stationed in Norway, but half our audience are Americans, so
that's fine.
I could be living anywhere. I could be on Antarctica and doing these shows as long as I have internet.
You could be on Mars. In fact, I think you are on Mars.
Yeah.
On the dark side of Mars.
Yeah. Or the North Pole, maybe.
No, I don't think you're on planet Earth. No.
Hey, let's not give too much away.
Okay.
I have to tell you, Tony, every time we have the shows on this topic, weird stuff happens. Yeah. It doesn't happen on the other topics, but we're like committed to track down the Fourth Reich, basically.
Good.
And as you know, it ends up at your... Pardon?
It's interesting because they've got all this stuff about D-Day going on over here at the moment, the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
Right.
Whereas actually there was a whole load of, you probably know, that the British did a lot of work to make the Nazis, convince the Nazis they were going to come to Norway.
Right, yep.
And the Nazis were convinced they kept something like 15 divisions in Norway.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't need them. So this kind of stuff...
They didn't need them. But there must have been maybe other reasons. I've interviewed a chap who claims that they were very close to... that they actually got a nuclear weapon, but not in time to use it. And in that case, heavy water...
I think want to use it. Okay, we want to talk about nukes. Subjects, because the nukes one is very, very good. I happen to know someone who was involved in that.
Okay.
For the Nazis, and also the deceptions of D-Day.
Right.
And I think we should look upon this little interview as a sort of alternative D-Day discussion.
Well, for me, the D-Day is just a part in because I want to follow the money. Yeah. De Mello didn't touch that, and we haven't really interviewed people. I think Peter Levenda will talk about it next time we discuss, but I think that's important. And then... Peter,
let me tell you about Peter. He's been sent on a wild goose chase.
You talking about Hitler?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe. He changed his mind on that one. But we agree that Bormann survived, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So that's enough. We don't need Hitler. Even if Hitler survived, he rot in the shadow. So He's kind of irrelevant at this point.
Well, everybody, the idea is everyone is supposed to focus on Hitler, right? Hitler, after 1941, Hitler was finished.
Right.
Okay, so I think so the other thing we could do is look at books, right? Some of the best books on all this, because some of the people who are dead now wrote really good stuff, maybe in the 60s, 70s, and 80s on the Second World War.
Yeah, you're referring to Manning and all that stuff,
Yeah.
Farrago.
He's just one, yeah, but there are also probably William Stevenson is the most important.
Stevenson, yes, but we can't avoid, I think, discussing Bilderberger.
No, of course not. No, we don't want.
Right? Because that's closely tied to this and to you. When I have you on, we have to go into Bilderberger. Because, many people think Bilderberger is just crazy conspiracy, so that has to be brought to arrest.
Yeah, let's draw some lines, okay? Because there's things that they claim that Bilderberger is doing, but they're not.
Right, and then I think maybe even EU. I mean, in these Brexit times, my view on EU. I'm a Norwegian, so I'm against it. But the one I sympathise most with in terms of English politics when it comes to EU is Galloway. That view.
Yeah.
So it's a non-bigoted view, but people think, oh, Brexit, that's bigots. Automatically they think. So I think the EU perspective make these Europhiles realize this is the wet Nazi dream, for example. That I think is relevant.
It's a new book. I'm just thinking of books again.
Yeah.
Somebody Cave Brown, a book called Bodyguard of Lies.
Oh,
do you know that one?
I haven't heard of it. No, that's a new one.
Oh, it's really, really important. It's because, this Operation Bodyguard was the code name for the D-Day deception.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was lots of deceptions. There was 30 or 40 levels to this, because they knew that they had to spend some time making sure that there was no that they would be successful in Normandy and not be thrown back.
Right.
So
okay.
August 1942
mm-hmm.
was the sort of pre-D-Day, which was Dieppe.
Okay, you know what? Let's start there then.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, let's go for it.
Yeah. So let's explore the roots of all these things. We had this series, which this show is a part of, where we try to track down Bormann.
Right.
Now you, as I understand it, you're critical to the question of Hitler's survival, but not to Bormann's. Why do you think Bormann survived the war?
Well, I would go so far as to say I know he survived the war.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the forensic evidence that has been rolled out on a couple of occasions, supposedly finding his body in Berlin, it just simply doesn't stand up. The soil that was on the skull, whether it was his or not, doesn't come from Berlin. It was, brought over. But most importantly, I think it's clear through this book, OpJB, which I take it you're familiar with,
mm-hmm.
By Christopher Crichton, that there was an operation conducted by Ian Fleming and under the orders of Winston Churchill and Major Desmond Morton, right at the very end of the Second World War in Europe, which was to bring Bormann out. And the reason they wanted him out is because he had he was the signatory to all of the bank accounts of Nazi Germany. And he was really the go-to guy for the Fourth Reich. So this really puts the Second World War into this completely different context of, well, there were all sorts of things going on to do with fascism, Nazism, and the battle between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. But at the end of the day, there was a tremendous amount of money that the Nazi Party had made out of this. And we're talking about all sorts of security. Really looting all of the vaults of all of the central banks in Europe.
Yeah.
And the money.
Mm-hmm.
It was all disappeared. The estimates are around about $1 billion, £1 billion at the time in 1945 had just vanished.
Well, I've heard it's much more than $1 billion. Because you have to take into account all the corporations, all the art, all the gold, make a total, and then all the bank transactions.
Well, it doesn't sound a lot. It doesn't sound a lot today, but I think in 1945 was a lot more. I wouldn't like to say, what the difference is between 1945 and now, but it's pretty clear that this money was then laundered through Sullivan and Cromwell, the Dulles brothers law firm. I mean, Alan Dulles was in Switzerland, of course, making these arrangements at the end of the Second World War, and then this money went down to Bormann in South America, who was really just an administrator. And those 750 companies, which Paul Manning talks about, were created, and then the money went into those. But I think it's really to get the whole story of why Bormann's important. And the reason I don't think that Hitler survived is, number one, because he was a spent force at the end of the war, drugged up to the eyeballs, and there was a lot of attempt to focus on Hitler. But actually, he was, he realised his star had fallen after Stalingrad. And I think if you want to follow some of the shenanigans of the collaboration, this is really due to, J.P. Morgan and the Rockefellers had gotten together with Winston Churchill and Roosevelt before the war had started, because they knew there was going to be a war. And we're talking about 1937, 1938. And they set up this organization, which was run by Bill Stevenson in the Rockefeller Center in New York, which was already preparing for war, and they knew where the war was heading. So this just shows me that all the sort of fairy stories about this whole business in 1939 was a big surprise. The invasion of Russia was a big surprise. They knew that the Nazis intended to invade Russia, the Soviet Union, and they were preparing for it. In fact, they knew that it would be very clever to get into Yugoslavia. This is Bill Donovan I'm talking about here, and to stage a coup in order to delay the Nazis to taking over Yugoslavia, so that then that meant that Barbarossa had to be put off by another few weeks or a month, and that would mean that the Germans would be bedded down and fail to succeed in taking Moscow as part of Barbarossa. So there was a lot of thinking going on. And this is all really in William Stevenson's book, A Man Called Intrepid. He also another one called The Bormann Brotherhood, but he really gives, I think, the best inside story during the war. Then you can go on to have a look at OpJB, which talks about getting Bormann out, this operation along the canals. And whenever I talk to people about this, Al, they always say to me, well, how on earth would they have been able to smuggle Bormann out from under the noses of the Russians? You've got the Russian Soviet army there watching as these little canals and Bormann kind of paddle by. Right. For something like 50 miles towards the American, the British zone. Well, I can tell you how they did it, and it's all explained in the book, which is a riveting read and a very beautifully written book. And it's because they had Russian-speaking people with Russian uniforms on who would, if any of the soldiers on the bank shouted to them or whatever, then they'd call out in Russian, swear at the other soldiers in Russia. And they had a woman with either as a colonel or a general's uniform, Russian uniform. So they were able to divert all these attempts. And there were
were these British spies, or were they on Team Bormann?
They were British spies, but then of course this is also a very, very, very important question. Whose side are they on? If they're getting the top Nazi guy out of Nazi Germany in the final 2 or 3 days of the Second World War, whose side are they on? Well, I would say, there was a fascinating crew, and the thing is, I really doubted this when I first saw the story. So I went and spoke to some of the people who'd known John Ainsworth Davis. He wrote the book under the pen name Christopher Crichton. A lot of people had said to him, look, you just simply cannot write this because it's all covered by the Official Secrets Act, and as soon as you publish it, you'll be put into jail.
Or a bullet.
Well, yeah, jail or a trial, possibly. But anyway.
But wouldn't that confirm the truth of it if they punished him for it?
Well, the thing is, he decided, he was given advice by various other people, and of course he knew Ian Fleming intimately very well, and Fleming had decided he wanted to write about some of the awful things he saw in World War II, the betrayals and this sort of thing, in a fictional form. and was very successful. In fact, probably the most successful post-war thriller writer in the world. And then there was also Dennis Wheatley, who was involved he was a writer. He was very much involved in the wartime deception planning, what we'd now call psychological warfare. And Wheatley too had decided after the war, well, I'm going to write about the Second World War in my books through fiction. And of course, they couldn't jail him for that. But John Ainsworth Davis was really worried. He even used the pen name Christopher Crichton because he was concerned about that. And I got to know some of the people who'd known him personally to get an impression of who is this guy, because I didn't manage to speak to him before he died about 3 or 4 years ago. And I was, every single one of them, people who'd known him, had nothing but good words to say about him. A man of integrity, a man of wit, humour. And so I just became, on every level, convinced that this is, it may be, of course, it's possible that this is a really, really devious deception, but I can see no way possible, with all of the evidence that there is, that the British were definitely involved. And the other thing which convinces me of the British guilt is studying the Bilderbergers and the Battle of Arnhem, because it's quite clear that the senior British officers made sure that the Battle of Arnhem was a failure. Now, this has always been a bit of a mystery in the Second World War. Oh, gosh, why did it not succeed? Wasn't it a bit of a disaster? Well, I can tell you it's because the battle was thrown by people in the British, senior people in the British Army. And we're talking generals, captains, these kind of people. In fact, 2 of them were involved in the Bilderberg conferences after the war. And it's the reason that the Bilderberg is called the Bilderberg is because of the link to Oosterbeek, which is on the outskirts of Arnhem, where the British were massacred in the Witches' Cauldron, they called it, by the Nazis. And in a way, it's a sort of in-joke to say, well, actually, we control these sorts of things. The British might have thought they were fighting with trustworthy generals, but actually the generals were just there to massacre them because they wanted to allow another 3 months for the Fourth Reich and the Third Reich to get their act together and to make sure that all of the wealth had been removed from Nazis.
So they were stalling for time.
Yeah, the idea was that the Nazis needed a few more months in order to get the wealth out from Berlin, away from, because the Russians were closing in pretty quickly. And so this totally failed operation the object of it was to take out the Ruhr, which was the industrial heartland, and the fact that it failed gave the Nazi empire, which was crumbling, another 3 months to make sure they'd squirreled away all that wealth effectively. And I mean, there's really no other explanation, I think, to Arnhem. It's not a series of accidents. The troops were deliberately misdirected into places where they shouldn't have been, and there was no real point to be there. And then when it looked as if the battle might be saved, in other words, that the guys at the bridge at Arnhem, the 1st Airborne Division, might just be rescued, then Lord Carrington appears on the scene and puts his foot down, and General Horrocks, and then they say, this is in Nijmegen, and they say, oh, well, I'll tell you what, we'll just sit here and wait and twiddle our thumbs until the British at Arnhem are dead. And then once the last one is dead, then we'll start moving our tanks forward to try and rescue them. So it was quite obvious by looking at the timing and the foreknowledge that they had of the SS being in the area that this was, and so I suppose what I'm saying here is that although the wider plan for the Second World War was laudable to get rid of the Nazi empire, actually the West had a hand in putting him there in the first place. The Brits certainly had. They saw him as a bulwark against the Soviet Union, and they thought, well, we need a fascist in Eastern Central Europe in order to sort of make sure that the Soviets can't get into Europe, and so they helped to create Hitler in the first place. So I suppose, I mean, getting back to but we were mentioning Adolf Hitler himself. When Stalingrad happened, he was spent. But then Bormann started really taking over most of Hitler's decisions. In fact, towards the end of the war, Hitler instituted a scorched earth policy. So he wanted every bridge, every town, every city, every factory burnt to the ground. After D-Day, where we're talking about August, September 1944, everything was being left, because Bormann was just simply countermanding Hitler's orders, and in the knowledge that Hitler would not find out, because everything was coming through Bormann at that point.
But hang on about this. First off, I must say I'm inclined to I'm open to the scenario of Creighton, but we don't really need neither Creighton or any, because there's so many good books that has made a case for Bormann's escape, that you can basically just pick your scenario. I've had on Carter Heydrich, who has done most of the research into the atom bomb that they attained. You told me that you're familiar with this too, this atom bomb thread. What's your take on it?
Well, the Nazis have definitely been developing the atom bomb. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. I mean, there is now nuclear waste been found. There's a story in the Daily Express, I think it was either 2017 or 2018, about eyewitness reports of atomic explosions which had been recorded by Allied intelligence, 2 different locations. And the other thing is, I mean, Carter is probably the best source on this, but he knows that they had enriched uranium, and they sent the enriched. And once it became clear that the war in Europe was finished, that they were going to lose, then they got this enriched uranium, and this is why, of course, they needed those extra 3 months to do all these little things to make sure that the various prizes that they got, technological innovations, etc., were neatly packaged up. Ready for Reinhard Gehlen and the intelligence people to do deals with Alan Dulles and people like that with the Americans, because their allegiance was very close to the United States, not to the Soviet Union. They weren't going to do any deals with Stalin, and so they sent off this shipment in a submarine off to Japan, and that's what the Nazis intended to do. But halfway along, this submarine got different orders. They said, no, you're going to the United States instead. And so the 2 Japanese officers who were on the submarine were shot dead. And I mean, they say they committed suicide, which I've actually doubt. But then that submarine did a 180-degree turn. Yeah,
Carter argues that's the payment for Bormann.
Well, I don't think it's just that. There's all sorts of other money moving around as well. I mean, it might be. I mean, I think he's right in that was one of the main bargaining chips, and he's quite right as well in saying that the technology the Nazis had in terms of the triggering devices, the lens explosives, in order to trigger a particular type of nuclear bomb, and also the enriched uranium was necessary in order for the Americans to have the 2 different types of bombs tested. So they couldn't have done it really without this Nazi technology. It did take a few months, but the Manhattan Project was kind of it had a few gaps that the Nazis then filled. And I think he's 100% right about that.
Okay, so let's tie this into Bilderberger. If you could give us like the origin of how, because I remember when there was a lot of hula hoop about it in the media, they first tried to deny that it was anything. Yep. Then they denied that it mattered. Like, oh yeah, sure, the world's most powerful people are gathering together, but pay no attention, nothing's going on. Yep. But you, in case people don't know it, has been in the forefront of sober reporting on this fact. So if you could give us why do you think Bilderberger warrants our attention, and how is it tied to the Third Reich?
Well, let's start with the second question first, because that's quite clear. Setting it up in Holland, the first meeting in 1954, Manfred Petrich and the All Smoke and Mirrors. I mean, if you've not had him on, I think he's definitely someone you should get, because.
Let me note his name. What was it?
Yeah, Manfred Petrich. His blog, he's Swiss German, and his blog is All Smoke and Mirrors, Alles Schall und Rausch, and he has done, I think, the absolutely best work of anyone in the world in digging out the Nazi origins of the Bilderbergs. I mean, what he's done is he's shown that a whole load of particularly for the first 5 years of the Bilderberg conferences, from 54 to 61 or so, many of the individuals coming along, some German, but not all German, had were coming along ostensibly as part of the kind of New Germany and maybe a German financial institution, a German university. What he's shown is many of these specific individuals had key roles in the Nazi party. And they were, I mean, for example, one was a propaganda deputy to Joseph Goebbels. Others were involved in sequestering Jewish and other wealth as part of the targeting, the anti-Semitic targeting of the Jewish people. And they were key people who would otherwise quite possibly have been on trial for war crimes, but they had not changed their identities, but they'd hidden their Nazi past. And so there they were blithely chatting away with people like Hugh Gaitskell, the leader of the Labour Party, at a Bilderberg conference. And he's chatting to these people, and they're having these nice Bilderberg conversations at the Bilderberg Hotel in Oosterbeek and other subsequent places around Europe and the United States. Quite clearly, many Nazis involved, including people who then went on to, one of the guys, I think it was Rudolf Müller, one of the early Bilderbergers, that went on to found the main, I think it's called the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, main newspaper now in Germany. And these people were very close to the Nazi war machine and the ideology of the Nazi party. So
wasn't the host himself a Hollandic Royal SS member or something?
Well, he's probably the key guy, isn't he? Yeah, he's Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. I mean, he was originally in the Nazi Party in the early 1930s. He was in NSDAP. He was also in the SS as an officer in the 1930s. Then he dropped all that. I think it was 1935 or 36, and he married the Dutch princess.
Oh, so he had to. Yeah, no choice.
Well, so he then dropped all this Nazi stuff, changed his kind of uniform. Although he couldn't speak Dutch very well, he passed himself off as a Dutch person in the run up to the Second World War, and he was one of the chief Dutch liaison officers right the way through the Second World War, being the Prince Consort, I suppose. He was, the Queen was with him. And look, so then after World War II, I mean, his actions during the war were bad enough. His involvement with the Arnhem campaign, quite obviously, if you're looking at it now, this is in September 1944, after Martin Bormann's Red House meeting, which was really the thing that set in train. This is in Strasbourg in August. I think it was the 24th or 25th of August 1944, set in train this Fourth Reich. In other words, the consolidation of German industry abroad, so making sure that it was all the foreign offices of the big German companies that had all the wealth, and that they would make sure that these companies continued abroad until the time was right for them to come back to Germany after the war. So that happened in August. And then in September, this Operation Market Garden, this terrible failure in Arnhem. Well, it turns out that Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands had sent in a spy, a so-called Dutch resistance fighter, who was actually an Abwehr agent. So he went in just before the battle started in order to alert the underground. But of course, he didn't alert the underground. He went straight to the Abwehr and said, oh, by the way, there's these massive airborne landings coming in Arnhem, Eindhoven, Nijmegen in a few days' time, just to make sure that the Abwehr knew that this Operation Market Garden was about to happen. So that was Bernhard.
Well, wasn't there a movie about this?
Well, it's called A Bridge Too Far. And really the only bit in the film from the late 70s, or mid-70s, I think, it does show Robert Redford having this altercation with Peter Carrington. Of course, Bernhard was the chairman of Bilderberg, one of the founders for the first 20 years until the Lockheed scandal. And Carrington then also was a Bilderberg chairman, but Carrington was on the ground at Arnhem too in a tank. And in the film, you could see the confrontation between the Americans, who've just taken Nijmegen Bridge, lost half of their men, and these several companies of men have managed to swim across the river in these silly little boats and take the bridge at Nijmegen. And then they go up to the British guys in their tanks, and they say, well, look, why aren't you moving? And I did speak to, before he died, I believe he's dead now, a guy called Moffat T. Burris, who was a captain in the 82nd Airborne Division, I Company. And he was one of those that got across the bridge. As a captain, he obviously he'd lost half his men. So he went up, literally, he himself went up to Carrington, sitting in a tank, who'd managed now to cross the bridge. And he said, well, why are you staying here? Why aren't you moving on? And this incident is in the film. So there's this altercation between, the British and the Americans in the film. But it's actually far worse than the film portrays, because one after another. In fact, so Burris arrives there. In fact, it looks like it was his little troop that cut the wires to stop the bridge being blown up. If you look into it, you'll find that he got his guys to cut the wires literally seconds before the bridge was about to be blown up at Nijmegen, and then he gets his, I think it's Major Cook, Colonel Tucker. So we're going up and up in seniority, and eventually General Gavin of the 82nd Airborne Division is also tapping on this tank saying, what are you doing? Why are you waiting here? We've just lost half our men taking this bridge so that you can go and rescue your fellow countrymen at Arnhem, and you're just going nowhere. So that incident in the film is actually far bigger than it portrays, but at least it's in there. So it shows a fair interpretation of it, but without all the background that I've given you. So Bernhard very much involved. Just
like the movie about Colonial Dignidad. It shows you the actions happening, but it doesn't put it in a political context.
And I think it's fair to say that people didn't know back then. It's easy for us with hindsight. Right. I think very many people knew in the 1970s. They hadn't put the pieces of the jigsaw together, right, as we've been able to do with hindsight.
The same is true for Bilderberger, because it was a lot of rumors about it, but now we know a lot more. Could you fill us in? What is it all about? Why should we care?
Well, it's let's draw some lines. First of all, it's a NATO organisation. It's not the rulers of the world. It's a political lobby for NATO. Right. So just as you get at the Security Council and the General Assembly of the United Nations, the military people are in charge. I mean, as we're just at the moment, we're having Trump's state visit to the UK with Theresa May, the zombie prime minister. The Americans are not interested in talking to Theresa May or any of the politicians. They're interested in talking to the military. Mm-hmm. And the military really are in charge. So when the military say we're going to do something, they tend to do it. So they'll find a politician who will sell this to the public. They'll find some media who will sell this to the public. And I think the same is true with Bilderberg, is that the military decide through NATO what they want to do, and in discussion with all the big corporations, which land they want to grab, which resources they want to take, and that then gets sold to the politicians. But
that's a intention of the Bilderberger meetings, is to bring the orders to the politicians.
I mean, it's a bit like a horse fair, really, where you're looking at the teeth of the horse, the height of the horse, what colour is it, how shiny is its fur, mm-hmm. And that's the way they look at the politicians. And if there's somebody who they like Bill Clinton or Tony Blair, someone who's pliable, compliant, convincing. These are all the qualities they're looking for. Someone who can seem credible in front of the cameras for them, really just to be their salesman. And that's actually what the politicians are nowadays in the West. As they go through these people, they're looking for who's going to be the next best salesman for our project, and who can lie the best and most convincingly in front of the TV cameras and to the newspaper journalists. Yeah. And if there are journalists in there, but they're, as Charlie Skelton, who's reporting on the conference in Montreux that's just passed, is saying there's actually more journalists on the inside than the outside. So the journalists on the inside are on the inside of the joke against the public. That there is a thing called democracy. No, of course there's not. And once you realise that, then you may be picked by the Bilderbergs too. But I mean, yeah, you're saying what? Okay. Red lines and rat lines and the Bilderbergs. So, yes, definitely NATO countries, and the people who are really in charge are the financial people and the tech giants, and I think also clear to say also the kings and queens and princes and the monarchs.
The royals are also present.
Yes, often. I mean, we've had an article just in the Daily Express in end of May, beginning of June 2019, talking about the presence of Prince Philip and Prince Charles at these meetings. It starts to look like a sort of little conference of the military with the Holy Roman Empire, which was I think it was supposed to have been gotten rid of in the 1800s sometime. But these guys, aristocrats, still believe that they're in charge. And in fact, in many ways, they are. Some of them are massive landowners. The Habsburgs, for example, still enormous landowners. And they have immense power through their wealth. Of course, what they would much rather see on their television screens is some kind of theatre, which is there for public consumption, where they are making decisions behind the scenes, like a kind of mafia behind the scenes. And I think that's really what Bilderberg is about. It's like, this is what is really going on. And the people who go there cannot do their conversations on Skype. I heard someone saying this recently, well, why can't we just do this on, Skype message? No, because secret deals are made over cocktails or glasses of wine or, vol au vents, and deals are made face-to-face, one-to-one. Like, if you get this sorted for me, I will make you king. I'll make you president. They're the kingmakers.
And we actually have evidence for stuff like this, right? That wars have been cleared and accepted in advance on meetings like this.
I don't think they do it in open session, in a formal session. I think what they do is what happens is people like Kissinger come along with the military people and the financial people who have agreed these things beforehand, and they float these various ideas and they see which politicians will bite. Which politicians will like what they see and will be able to convincingly back what we're saying here. So, I do not believe that that this is a real decision-making body. I think decisions get made elsewhere. I mean, we're talking about things like the Pinay Circle and or other sorts of networking groups of the aristocracy.
So this is more a news brief for the decisions that already has taken place.
I think that's probably true. Yeah. And certainly from seeing that some of the participants over the years have come out very much against what they've seen at Bilderberg, does suggest that. But war, definitely war. I mean, that's obviously what this is about.
Same as Bohemian Grove, they cleared the Iraq war there before it happened.
Well, the Iraq war was definitely leaked from Bilderberg in 2002 and 2003. Jim Tucker from the States leaked both of those conferences that there was, Iraq was target. And in fact, in 2002, people were saying, well, what are you talking about? It's complete rubbish, nonsense. There's no excuse, no reason to go into Iraq. But by a year after that, it was a reality. This illegal war had happened. The masses of troops had gone in from the West, and no one could quite believe it.
But they haven't reached the level yet where they're releasing info about the Bilderberger meetings, have they? Because in the beginning, the meetings themselves are secret. Now they accept they're happening, but the contents are still classified. Has that developed lately? Well, look,
let me give you an example. I mean, Iran and the Middle East agenda of Iran and Syria has been on the Bilderberg agenda officially for the last, 8 years.
Oh, okay.
This year, it's not there.
Oh, that's good news.
No, it's not. It means that they don't want you to know they're talking about it.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So this will be woven in with other discussions or talked about at the bar. Right. But it's definitely, to have Pompeo at the meeting and Kushner, and not to be talking about targeting Iran.
Both of them were on the latest Bilderberger gathering? Wow.
Well, they're not on the list. The Pompeo was not on the list. Kushner was. But Kushner's come straight from Tel Aviv, from Netanyahu, into this conference in Switzerland. And we're supposed to believe that Iran is not on the agenda. Well, this is, they're just using this to misdirect people to think that it's not there. They're talking about AI. This is one fascinating for me, because I think many of the wars that they want, like this potential third world war with Iran, are so insane that no ordinary human being would want to get involved in it. Hence their need for artificial intelligence, hence their need for automatically controlled drones to conduct these kinds of conflicts. And I think what they're doing is they're getting so far into almost like a kind of Armageddon scenario that many human beings who are involved in the military are saying, well, what are you talking about? And of course, if they say that, they'll be out of the loop. But the politicians don't care. They're just chicken hawks, aren't they? They've never been involved. They've never heard they will say whatever it takes in order to get the job. And to get the fame, to get the position of power like Theresa May has. I mean, it's interesting, incidentally, with Brexit that this is one of the things that came out when she resigned, which very few people have picked up, and nobody's picked up on this, is we've had MPs from the Tory party confessing that Theresa May was not involved with Brexit. Actually, it was all being conducted through her husband. So if they wanted to get anything done, they had to phone Philip May. Philip May is the guy whose Capital Group in the US is the major shareholder in BAE Systems, the people that make money out of warfare. Right. Lockheed Martin is they're massive investors in Lockheed Martin. They're also massive investors in Serco, the private prison company networks. So these are the guys. I mean, Philip May is sort of, smiles sweetly and he's occasionally there in the background. The idea is she's not supposed to notice him. But actually, Theresa May is just she's a cipher. So strange that the feminist programs, have not really picked up on the fact that she's been so mercilessly used by her husband.
Mm-hmm.
All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
But, in these Brexit times, by the way, Brexit has tanked her, and that's a good thing. Unfortunately, Brexit will also, I think, stop an anti-war president from getting to power, namely Corbyn. Before the Brexit thing, he had huge support now. Yeah. I think that will make him fall too. But let's tie European Union into this. Some people say that was conceived already in 42 or something by the Nazis. What's the truth of the Nazi roots?
Even before that, actually, even before that. It's 1923 to the Pan-European Union, the Habsburg family. They formed the Pan-European Union, I think it was 1923 in Munich. In the same city a few years later, guess what else sprang from Munich? The Nazi Party. And so that was the first indications. Really, in 1942, it was, I think, that the economic ministry in Germany, is it Walter Funk, I think, from Deutsche Bank or the Bundesbank, drew up this whole Europäischen Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft plan, which was an economic plan for fascist cartels to control the economies of Europe. And Paul Manning's book really talks about this quite a bit as well. And he's saying effectively, look, let's have a cartel running everything. The banks at the top of the tree. So when we take over France, what we'll have already done is we'll have already taken over the French banks. And by taking over those banks, I mean, talking about buying shares in them, we will also have taken over much of the industry because the industry has been built by the banks and is indebted to the banks. So we will then get preferential control over the directors because we'd be the major shareholders in these big industries. So that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to have the whole thing run by high finance and by cartels, the Krupps, the Thysens, who had funded the Nazi Party in the first place. This is the way they designed the continent. And the EU has rolled that out in the common market, and they even called it, didn't they, in Germany, the Europäischen Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft, European Economic Community, the EEC, which then became the EU. Now, the political union, it was no accident, is it, that we've now got a situation where with you in Norway, you have to kind of go along with all of the things that the European Union comes along with.
People are rising against it now.
But you don't have any say in it. So that was really the common market, the EEC. Yeah. That's what many people in Britain are suggesting now. I mean, well, they have been all the time saying, oh, well, we can just get out of the EU, but we won't get out of the customs union.
It's ludicrous. It's even worse than being in today.
Absolutely right. Totally agree with you. And they're saying this is a good thing to do. In Switzerland, it's the same. It's totally insane to be suggesting that is a good thing. So you don't have any say in any of the rules, but you have to abide by them all. That is a dictatorship.
Yep.
So why would you want that? And anyway, even if you do have any say in the rules, as Cameron has found and various of the other British politicians, Theresa May, who've been trying to negotiate with Brussels, is you do not negotiate with these people. They don't give an inch. So,
they made a laughing stock out of her, May.
Yeah. I mean, they did the same with Cameron, actually. He was making a big fuss about, I'm going to go and broker this deal. Nothing happens. So the whole organisation is set up to work for industry, and the politicians are simply there to sell industry's plans to the population, and the MEPs get no say really whatsoever. All they do is, they've just had this copyright directive that's come through, which means that you can close websites if they've got some sort of copyright dispute. It enables big corporations with money to just pay a lawyer to close a website. And that's all just gone through. The MEPs have had to finally give in to that. So the power is all in the hands of the Commission, and these are all failed politicians. I mean, it's almost as if it's the worst possible scheme for running Europe that anyone could possibly have devised. Am I wrong?
But this is outside of democratic control, right?
Totally. It's just the Commission.
Who chooses them?
The failed politicians.
Someone has to elect them or select them, obviously.
Well, only we select the leaders of the EU by voting them out of office. So if they're a failed MP like Chris Patten or Neil Kinnock or somebody here in Britain, once they've failed, then suddenly the EU wants to recruit them. So we appoint the leaders of the EU, the real leaders and the Commission, by kicking them out of politics. So how perverse is that? I mean, it's an insane system. Isn't it probably true that it was bound to fail? I just think that it's great that the Brits have really made things difficult for them. It's fantastic that that's happened. It makes me feel proud to be Brit. But at the end of the day, what is going to happen is going to be a lot of chaos. And it seems to me that the Brussels machinery is trying to make it as chaotic as possible. So it's trying to keep as many people in as it possibly can for as long as it possibly can.
I think it will backfire.
But it's going to be chaos. I mean, all these various countries they're trying to keep in, the Italians, I mean, they're completely controlling Italian politics, they're controlling Greek politics. In Germany, there was somebody shot dead the other day, I believe, or shot himself, or someone, in the main, is it the CDU party in Germany? All sorts of very, very peculiar things going on. But I think that seems to me to be the actual project of the EU, is to create as much chaos in Europe as possible. And then, of course, once you have order from chaos, they will come along with some kind of thing. We'll say, oh, well, this will sort everybody out. The euro, of course, is about to fail. I mean, we interviewed Steve Keen, the economist who wrote Debunking Economics, and he said it's a suicide pact. It cannot work, the euro. And it's being proved all over Europe that it cannot work for anyone that's actually having to live under the euro. The dollar is also under threat massively. I mean, the former governor of the Bank of England, Mervyn King, has informed us all that the West is now facing a £144 trillion debt overhang. And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time. So it's basically two cliff edges. So we're on an economic cliff.
Hang on. Who are we owning this debt to? China or the oligarchs? Or?
Well, it's not just okay. So this is mainly owed to the banks that are creating this debt in the first place. Mm-hmm. So they are creating debt, spending it, and then that debt is not being repaid. So this is quantitative easing. This is the crazy stuff called quantitative easing.
Right. You've been on top of Bank of International Settlements.
What did you say, Bank for International Settlements?
Yeah, you've been on top of them for many years. They have a Nazi connection, and are they central in this?
Definitely. I mean, this is the bankers' central bank, isn't it? The central bank. They were involved in financing Hitler's rise to power. And at the Bretton Woods conference after World War II, the John Maynard Keynes and various others, they all voted to abolish the bank. And so the bank moved to an anonymous office over a chocolate shop in Basel opposite the railway station, where he didn't even say on the door, Bank for International Settlements. You had to knock on this door so many times or ring the bell, a code. Mm-hmm. So the bank carried on. But it is the main banking regulator for the whole world. And I think if it was shut down tomorrow, it would get the world would get very much lighter very, very quickly. Because money has been, it was created originally as something which would be a servant to people. It's become the master. So many people just make their decisions every day based on how am I going to get enough money to feed my children, to pay the rent, to stop being evicted from my home. And that's a major part of all of this. And, that's another reason why the Swiss have, why people like Manfred, I was mentioning earlier from All Smoke and Mirrors blog, he just got out of Switzerland. He said this country is being controlled and there's no real democracy. The politicians, as he so beautifully puts it, the politicians have nothing to say. Nothing to say. That's how he puts it, and because they're never actually addressing the real issues, to do with land, money, land redistribution. Everybody should have a piece of land. I mean, we've got 65 million people in Britain and 65 million or so acres, and they say there's got to be homeless people on the streets. I mean, no, everybody needs somewhere to live, and everyone should have somewhere to live. This is called social justice, and yet money is used to keep that land away from people, and enclosure over the years. The privatization of land is a major, that was the English Civil War, did a lot to accelerate that, I'm afraid. It's the Brits again and our empire, spreading these crazy British ideas all around the world. And the Chinese are getting on that bandwagon too. I was in New Zealand a few years ago, and there were a whole load of Chinese learning how to do land property sales.
Yeah, they're taking over Africa and South America, but they at least do it in a much more clever way than Americans have done.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Because they give something back to the areas they're invading. Whereas,
this is another thing about the Bilderbergs, really important to understand, is it was created by the psychological warfare people and the War and Peace Studies Group of the Council on Foreign Relations in 1943, the first ideas of having a Bilderberg meeting. So it was really a way of the Americans controlling Europe, making sure that that they were involved in selecting politicians and making sure they knew who they wanted to be the next chief politician in various countries, giving them a lot of positive media coverage, that sort of thing, but also to make sure that none of these European countries started going communist. Because, of course, a lot of very attractive ideas. In fact, the CIA spent, I think, more than any other project in the entire history of the CIA was spent on stopping Italy going communist, because Italy was communist. Most of the people wanted the communist government, and they'd seen how successful it had been in redistributing wealth and, making sure that people had a fair deal at work and all that sort of thing. And people liked communism in Italy. So the Americans and the Bilderbergers did everything they could to stop Italy going red.
Yep, it's proven in later years.
Operation Gladio, which, by the way, I mean, some of your listeners may not realise, was NATO basically took that straight out of the Nazi field manual.
Not only that, they even took the people.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about
Stay Behind was filled with Nazis.
That's right. It was the Nazi werewolf program from the last 6 months of the Second World War. Hello?
Yeah?
Yeah, the last few months of the Second World War. Hang on, it's gone quiet here. Can't hear me.
Can you hear me?
Did anything happen there, Dave?
Hello?
Oh, that's better. Yep.
You can hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
So NATO, EU, Bilderberger, Bank of International Settlements, it's all got Nazi roots.
Yep.
But they say that most of the top bankers are Jewish, not Germans. Is this true?
Well, look, I don't use this word Jewish. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I guess it's a religion, right?
You can look at Zionism, yeah, and you can also look at people who are Khazarian, Ashkenazi, whatever, but don't talk about Jews, because this is a religion. It's like, it's like calling Tony Blair a Christian,
or a Catholic,
or George Bush a Christian. I mean,
but we get responses from. There will always be a certain segment of listeners who will draw the Jew card. I want you to address that.
Bible makes it very clear. Even the Bible makes it very clear. The people who call themselves Jews, I think, is in the book of Revelation, but are not, and they lie. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a whole little section in the book of Revelation that says that this is a lie. So, I mean, we shouldn't really be repeating that lie. I mean, it's like. I mean, what happened in Nazi Germany was the rabbinic tradition was wiped out. Mm-hmm. Many of the powerful financiers who call themselves Jewish, who didn't actually adhere to the religion at all, and they were spared, no problem at all.
Yeah, rich secular Zionists.
Yeah, it's the secular. How can you be a secular Jew? How can you be a secular Christian? Right, these are terms which are designed to just confuse and send your mind into a cul-de-sac. Mm. So. I mean, yes, there's the, Christianity has been used, the Catholic Church. I mean, what about the Vatican being used for, conducting safe passage for Nazis at the end of the Second World War? I mean, that's not Christian. It's like talking about the Templars, the Knights Templar in the Crusades, rivers of blood as they charge into Constantinople in an attempt to destroy the Orthodox Church, kill almost everybody in Constantinople. That isn't Christian, so I think there's definitely use of these terms to try and deceive people, particularly the mass media, which is why I'm surprised to hear you use it. The mass media, that's the sort of term they use quite a bit.
Oh, yeah. And anti-Semite too. If you have Zionism criticism, then you're an anti-Semite. Yeah. If you're a Jew criticizing Zionism, then you're a self-hating Jew.
I mean, they also use the terminology like these right-wing Christians in America, or the evangelical Christians or fundamentalist Christians in America, blah, blah. These are all the wrong terms. The people you're talking about are Christian Zionists. And the Christian Zionists are the maniacs. Pompeo is a Christian Zionist. He's not a fundamentalist Christian. He is, what does that mean anyway? Does it mean he reads the Bible every day? No. He just uses it as an excuse because he wants a war with Iran, just like Netanyahu. So I think, the idea of the idea is to sort of sweep up all these maniacs and try and mix them in with decent Orthodox Jews, decent Jewish people.
Yeah, but my point is there was Nazi bankers. You had Schaft or whatever his name was, Hjalmar Schacht.
Schacht, yeah.
Yeah, he was German, wasn't he?
About the main ideologue behind the Tool Society and the Theosophists that gave birth to the Nazi Party. I mean, Peter Lender's done a load of work on this. Yeah. Brilliant stuff, actually, digging all this out. I mean, we're supposed to believe that he wasn't Jewish. I think he was Jewish. Rosenberg, and so just because they're calling themselves Jewish doesn't mean to say that they have any link whatsoever with the Old Testament or even the Middle East. It means they're imposters, just like Tony Blair and George Bush. So, I think we just got to draw a line between the real and the not real in order to help anybody that's trying to understand this clarify. Because what they're really trying to do is exactly what they did in Northern Ireland, what they've been doing in the Middle East, is to set one faith against another, set one part of a faith against another. So we were told in Britain that the Northern Ireland conflict was a Protestant versus Catholic. No, rubbish. It's a Republican versus Loyalist conflict. But you can confuse people by saying it's a religious conflict. The same in the Middle East with the Shia versus the Sunni.
Yeah, divide and conquer, the oldest playbook in the world.
What they always try and do is they'll always try and make out this is the Sunnis and the Shias fighting each. No, it's not. It's a bunch of mercenaries, Wahhabists and Takfiris, fighting a legitimate government of some sort, whether it's Syria, Iran, or whoever. So there's always this terminology all around religion. It's pretty clear to me, right since we had Adolf Hitler and his attempt to wipe out the whole rabbinic tradition in Europe, that there's been continued attempts to set religions against each other and actually to wipe out all those anybody who's involved in any of those, who has faith in any of those Judeo-Christian faiths, including Islamically.
But Bush was actually right. There is an axis of evil, and that axis is USA, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. That's for as far as today's powers goes.
Okay.
But hey, Tony, I'm not so clear still on the connection between EU and the Third Reich. Could you elaborate a little more on that?
Well, I mean, I think you just need to go back to look at the this plan, this 1942 Europäische Wirtschaftsgemeinschaft. It's just identical to the economic plans for Europe.
But was it an actual blueprint?
Yes. Oh, it's a massive document, all in German. So, I mean, the other thing is that the EU has been a very slow process over the years, but it's been absolutely relentless. Margaret Thatcher was kicked out of office because she refused to hand over Britain's sovereignty. You know, so this has been a slow attempt to create a United States of Europe, and I think it's really good to look back at the Pan-European Union and these aristocrats. You know, this kind of Holy Roman Empire, to see where it's really been coming from, and I mean the other people just implement it because they're paid to implement it. There's money around to do that, and. I mean, you can see how, actually, if you go back to the American War of Independence, the Civil War, you can see Albert Pike, this famous figure. Well, he's not anywhere near as famous as he should be. He is making this letter to Mazzini, the creator of the mafia in Italy, saying he wants various world wars, and if we have these world wars, we can shift power and basically totally destroy the Judeo-Christian faiths, and we can have the whole of humanity in our hands spiritually, which is an interesting plan. It's a pretty devilish plan. But what was the real point of the American Civil War? It was to concentrate power in Washington. I mean, there's a lot of talk about slavery, and that was obviously a major factor in it too, in motivating people. But what motivates people isn't always real. So, I mean, look at the Crusades. Back in the medieval times, what motivated the Crusaders was something called the Letter of Prester John. Now, the Letter of Prester John was fabricated by the Vatican, and it said that there was a Christian king who was the other side of the Middle East somewhere, and he was fighting the Muslims. And in order to help him, we had to go to his aid, and we had to fight the Muslims too from this side, and hopefully, you know, we could then liberate Jerusalem. Well, the Letter of Prester John was a massive motivating factor in getting people to get on their horses and chug off down to the Middle East, but it was a complete lie. Like 9/11 was a complete lie. The actual the idea that Al-Qaeda was behind it is beyond a joke now, because, you know, we've been allied to Al-Qaeda in Syria, for example. So the motive isn't always anything to do with reality. In fact, that seems to be how tricked over the years.
This brings us to a crucial matter. You have a DVD called The New World Order, and I guess that's a good name as anyone. But could you define, because we're getting closer to the real question, who is number one?
Okay.
As the prisoner posted back in the day. So if we introduce the concept of New World Order, how would you define that?
New World Order, I think, is it's a project for beyond democracy, I suppose, beyond the West. So it's something that it attempts to rule from behind the scenes. I mean, the obvious image is the one of the eye in the top of the pyramid on the back of the dollar. This Novus Ordo Seclorum. So that, I mean, it's often mistranslated. It actually means a new secular order. And so the idea is it's away from God, and we don't need God, and mankind can create his own order. I think there's a philosophy behind this New World Order that it probably goes along with something like transhumanism. So the idea is that there is no God, and man can become God himself, and that is to say he can genetically engineer himself. He can genetically engineer his children to live forever, to get rid of the genes of aging. He can have an interface, a biological interface with computers, with with laptops and digital systems, and that he can have a relationship with artificial intelligence that enables him to rise above the ordinary. So I think this is also very, very, very important in this, is a separation from ordinary people. So the elite do see themselves as completely... I mean, I've met some of these guys. I met James A. Johnson, who's one of the Bilderbergers, he's also a director of Goldman Sachs. He was the bag man for Hillary Clinton, for Barack Obama's election campaigns. And they just see themselves as superior to everybody. I mean, they are really aloof in their own manner, and they just they have absolutely disdain for ordinary people. They see themselves as bigger. The other one was Jacob Wallenberg, or was it Marcus Wallenberg? I'm not sure. Anyway, one of the Wallenbergs. The people, these are the biggest bankers and private bankers in Sweden. They own Sweden pretty much, and they own the Swedish political process. They own the Swedish industries. And they're very supercilious types. I mean, they believe that we are Untermensch, and again that will link us back to the Nazis, won't it?
Yeah, and you have a book coming up called The Siege of Heaven: How Breaking the Grip of Oligarchy Will Unleash the World's Human Potential. Is what you just talked about touched in this book?
Well, if this book ever comes out, that'd be nice. I mean, I have sort of chivied up the publishers to get it out, but that they have been a little bit slow. I mean, I don't really blame them because they've got a lot on apparently. But
can't you just self-publish in this day and age, Lulu or something?
Probably, yes, I probably could. But I mean, I think this a larger part of what we need to do, I think, is we need to educate. And we need to be educators, and we need to educate others as to how the oligarchy is doing what it's doing. The truth is out there. I would suggest that it's not actually that difficult to figure out how things are working. There's quite a lot of really good information out there about how to do something about this. And that is really to just, first of all, in our own minds, to be clear about what we want, what our values are, justice, social justice, and we just to simply refuse to be browbeaten. And the reason I called it Siege of Heaven is because I think what we've seen is a tiny number of people. I mean, just one example. Over the years, there's a small number of people doing this to us. I was knocked over by the connection between the two Cromwells in Britain. I mean, we had the dissolution of the monasteries, which was absolute destruction of what was in those days was the welfare state. The monastic system where education was going on, hospitals, all sorts of things like building roads and infrastructure, that sort of thing the monasteries were doing. In the mid-1500s was completely decimated by Henry VIII. And his guy to do that was a guy called Thomas Cromwell. 100 years later, we had the English Civil War with Oliver Cromwell. And I suddenly thought, well, I mean, these guys are a bit, peculiar. They both got the same surname. Are they related? And I asked a couple of friends of mine, people who should know, no, they weren't related. Yes, they were related. The same family was involved in smashing the monasteries as part of the Reformation, and also smashing the country and killing the king as part of the English Civil War. And really it was a part of the same process, which was a small number of people, in this case merchants and bankers, gaining control of the country. And that enabled the creation of the British Empire, the Industrial Revolution. I mean, the biggest empire the world had ever seen. And it was so big that in the late 1800s, Cecil Rhodes seriously put together the plan to take over the world. He thought that the British Empire was at such a stage that if we played our cards right, the British would control the world. And that's when he set up these secret societies in his will that became the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the Chatham House, in the States later manifested as the Council on Foreign Relations. So these private think tanks that were supposed to direct foreign policy. So that's the stage that Britain was at. And the fact that Oliver Cromwell was the great-great-grandson of Thomas Cromwell's sister, I think should be more widely known. A handful of people have been behind these massive transformations just here in Britain that led to so much, influence across the world, because Britain became, after the Civil War, really during the Civil War, became the first capitalist country in the world. So the merchants had taken over the whole of Britain. In previous generations, and back in medieval times, there'd been, merchants and capitalists controlled cities, and that was the way it worked. And the feudal classes that controlled the land really ran the countries through the king, the queen, whatever. But that was the Civil War was what really got the ball rolling, killing the king, changing the relationship, and this was done deliberately by Oliver Cromwell's son-in-law, Henry Ireton, who, when there was going to be a vote in Parliament after the war about, making negotiations with the king, he'd spied on the MPs this is in 1648, late 1648. He spied on all the MPs, and all of the ones that were pro-negotiation with the king, he made a little list of them. And then he gave them to Colonel Thomas Pride, who came in the day before the vote and arrested all of them.
Effective. Wow.
So when the vote happened, the king was impeached, or put on trial for his life, and then executed by Cromwell's son-in-law, effectively just getting rid of all of the MPs who might vote against him. Imagine if that was to happen nowadays. The troops, the soldiers marching into the Houses of Parliament, and just anybody that was voting for Brexit or against Brexit, they would arrest them and put them in jail. And so the vote went the right way.
Right. Well, they have a more civil way of doing that today, right? They just put up a new election.
It's called M5, and it's it's called private intelligence and secret services, but they definitely, the Americans are doing a hell of a lot of spying, and a lot of these things. For example, the euro was put together by spying on the various countries that didn't want to join it, to undermine them and make sure that the various people were bounced out of power who were going to be resisting the euro. So that's how things happen nowadays, and that's one of the reasons why we see so many of these tech companies, spying firms, and Facebook and people like this, on the Bilderberg conferences. Thiel, these guys. Eric Schmidt is now running things really at Bilderberg, the founder of Google. And that's why, because these are really front-end surveillance systems for the NSA and for the GCHQ. So when you're typing in your Google search, every single letter you type is being monitored by the NSA, and they can then switch someone literally on a screen in the NSA in real time to your computer to be watching everything and to go in and have a look at what is on this, who is this person that's searching for this subject in real time. And that's the world we live in, although mass media aren't really explaining that to us.
So when you say they have access to the computer, do you mean the browser, or do you mean actually inside the hard disk?
Well, I don't think they have any trouble getting into, certainly a Windows computer, do they? Or an Apple. No. It's just, it's wide open to them, as far as I understand.
Yeah. Okay, last question then. When we go back to the missing money of Bormann, where we began, there is this Argentinian journalist. He works for The Guardian, I think. Not Abel Basti, he's in Argentina. Someone else. It was Lawrence who mentioned him to me. Apparently he's tracked down this money, and he believes it's still in play. Where do you think it all ended up? Because you said Bormann was an administrator.
Well, yeah, he set the companies up, okay, so that was his job. But he also made a lot of the appointments to the boards of these 750 companies. I think, there's actually if you go online, you can find a list of, I think it's in it, the 8 or 9 companies that run the world's food system. For example, what you do is you find that almost all the food brands fall in. I mean, there's a whole load. There's Kraft, Procter & Gamble, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola. I can't remember them all right now.
Monsanto.
Well, no, this is not a food company, as far as I know.
Oh, okay, food.
But anyway, the point here being that the idea was to create corporations which would effectively be the government. So as that money comes through, Sullivan and Cromwell and Dulles and John Foster Dulles' firm in New York, and it's then being funneled into these businesses, and then Nazis appointed to the boards. So we're talking about Nazis with nice suits on, some with altered identities, and many of them were the big people who got the biggest rewards were people who'd been Nazi agents in the West and Japan and places like that. So these people would be given jobs on these boards and be just told, well, you've got as much money as you want pretty much, and just go on and take over that industry. And that's what we've seen, massive hostile takeovers all over the world. So not in places where what happened in Russia, I think, is a whole another fascinating episode in 1999 and 2000, because that country was about to be subsumed into the Borg as the oligarchs were vultures eating away, but then Berezovsky made the fatal mistake of choosing Putin to be his. He was deputy prime minister at the time. In fact, Putin was put to the test by Berezovsky. I think it's pretty clear in the Moscow riots and bombings in 1999. Blocks of flats were blown up supposedly by the Chechens, but Berezovsky had been involved in this, and they wanted to get the Chechen war going, and because Putin, as acting prime minister, turned a blind eye to this, Berezovsky and the oligarchs thought, we can trust Putin because he could, we can expose his collaboration with us on these hotel bombings. Sorry, not hotel, apartment bombings. If he starts to step out of line, so we've got him, by the short and curlies, and so Putin then was their blue-eyed boy. He'll look more credible than Yeltsin. We've already got most of the country anyway. We've bought it up. We've taken it. We've moved it abroad, the ownership of these ex-Soviet industries. But Putin then in 2000 turned the tables in, I think, very courageous way, and decided, obviously he had some friends at the KGB, FSB, who were, he would be not just doing this alone, and then said to Berezovsky, right, well, I'm very sorry, but that old charge under Yeltsin about the Aeroflot shares, I can't stop them. They're going to be coming around to interview you tomorrow, and they may possibly arrest you. Just as an old friend, I'm telling you it's happening. So if you better get the first plane out of Russia in the morning, and then we can try and sort this out another time. Of course, he never came back. Berezovsky flew straight to London, and Putin got Russia back from the oligarchy. An incredible move, really. And then Berezovsky was starting to talk too much in London. He was very close, by the way, to the Queen's cousin, the head Freemason. And the Masons, by the way, were involved very much in Bilderberg too. And that's Prince Michael of Kent. And he was on this payroll of Prince Michael of Kent. But he was, the thing is, who's by way of fluent Russian speaker, and he was starting to talk too much. So he was, I believe, officially it was suicide, but I believe he was executed, as most people do that bother to look into what happened to Berezovsky in London.
Right, interesting. But if we see here Bilderberger, EU, NATO, CIA, even NASA, they're all under the corporations, they're all flooded with Nazis. How can it then be that the Nazi philosophy did not get a revival? Did the old timers just throw away, let's say, the anti-Semitism and the more passionate Hitlerism of their ideology and just continued as
it's a bit more
Zionists or
so they got rid of most of the Jews in Europe, the real Jews, and now it's moved on to Islamophobia in Islam and the mass murder of Islamic people and the demonization of Islam. So the Nazi philosophy is definitely still there. It's taken on a new appearance. It's the same thing, really. And also, I think it's quite fair to say that Europe is a cartel system, which was the fascist Nazi Germany economic model. There's no way that people are going to get into business anymore, really, in any kind of serious way, because the banks won't lend to them, even if there is wide open competition and a monopoly. So the system is rigged. Everything is rigged. If you're a small business, maybe if you could maybe start out as a hairdresser, that you might succeed. You could start any kind of small concern, but there's no way you're going to be doing anything sizable, like building aircraft or even cars. In Britain, we don't build any cars here in Britain. I think maybe there's one or two like luxury car models still being made where they produce about one a month, but the entire car industry is now owned by foreign interests, and all the technology that was developed, for example, by the British, the jet.
Monopolism is a trait of, I say, a fascist, a corporatism, and the multinational corporations are dwindling into monopoly on all areas.
The most important thing to look at with this new fascism is what I mentioned before, is this transhumanist idea. Yeah. I think that's one of the key ideological elements, is they really do believe, the Bilderbergers, and certainly Wallenberg was one of them that I spoke to, and I got the sense that this is his kind of thing, is they just believe they're superior, and they have no interest in, for example, free press, freedom of speech. They believe they're control freaks, effectively, and they have got all this. They've put their faith in the ability to buy up in money, in the ability to buy up any kind of competition. So we don't have fights in Europe anymore, but we have hostile takeovers, which are just as effective as controlling industries. And of course, the media just becomes another factory to take over with these banker tanks. And so really it's just their show on the TV screen.
What do you think are the political essence?
How do you mean?
Those who calls the shots, the global elite, do they have any ideology?
They're basically an aristocracy, aren't they? They're a very super elite bunch of small number of animals.
Just self-preservation, just surviving on top.
Yeah, I don't think they have any real belief system other than in themselves, and they want to get as much as they can for them and their own children.
Except what they may use to exploit, right? As they would with Zionism, even.
Yeah, it's very much a cul-de-sac philosophy, isn't it? So they're never going to be satisfied. Really, it's like their power is like a drug. It's like heroin, and there's never going to be enough for them. And these people really are verging on, being psychopathic in their behaviour. And that's what I believe we could be seeing something later this year with Iran. I don't honestly think that, there's a lot of saber rattling, but it looks to me as if this is absolutely for real, and these people are, maniacal enough to pursue this, this plan to have a massive clash between the Zionists and Islam in order to try and smash Islam like the Nazis tried to smash Judaism. Real Judaism.
Not really Islam. It's more the the parts of Islam that's not under their control. I mean, Saudi Arabia is lockstep with these guys.
Yeah, but that's not Islamic. Saudi Arabia is not Islamic, really.
No, I agree.
It's not. It doesn't follow the Islamic, really.
Yeah, you mean the traditional Islam? They want to eradicate that.
Yeah, and I mean these faiths have a tremendous. I mean, I don't know how much you travel. I've been very lucky to have travelled in Iran, and if you just meet ordinary folk in Iran, they're proud of having an Islamic republic, and the moral values of Islam are very good moral values. They're very welcoming to strangers. I mean, you can't generalize about a whole people, but it's an important thing to have. And it's impossible to make it change with the media. You can't change what people think when they believe in a specific philosophy, which is unchanging, and they want to be able to just manipulate people. This is one of the things I think they hate most about genuine Judaism, the Neturei Carter and Orthodox Jews adhere to, and genuine Islam and genuine Christianity, is because you cannot make people malleable. They have beliefs that cannot be changed because of their faith, and they hate that. more than almost anything else, because they're addicted to power, and that power means controlling people, controlling people's minds in the same way as a farmer, controls his cattle and his sheep and his animals. I mean, that's the mentality I think that they have towards us. And I think it's no coincidence that George Orwell wrote his book Animal Farm. I mean, he's really just talking about the way that these people think about us, and he knew that. And I think actually possibly he was, bumped off Orwell too, because he was writing some very, very powerful stuff in the 40s and the 1950s.
Became visionary work. So in the same way they eradicated Rabbiism in the 30s, they're trying to eradicate Shia today. So that's Saudi Arabia can take over. I mean,
I wouldn't say Shia or Sunni is right or wrong. I just think that both have got twisted versions. I mean, just like the Vatican has got a very twisted version of the Catholic faith. I mean, you find ordinary Catholics fine, nice, genuine people, but this is where the little eye at the top of the pyramid comes in, isn't it? Well, we don't mind what people do down the bottom, but we control the top. That's the Illuminati. And whether or not there is anything called the Illuminati still around, people have got to be absolutely clear that this was a very, very genuine movement back in just after.
Yeah, but the original Illuminati seemed to be more of a rebel movement trying to change.
I don't think so. There's still, okay, so you get the Illuminati formed just after the abolition of the Jesuits, right? Cecil Rhodes in his will says, I want to form a secret society based on the Jesuit model of secret societies. And the Illuminati was absolutely fixed on two things, is the head and the heart. So they wanted to control and own politics through political parties, and they wanted to control and own religions. So
yeah, but this wasn't unique for that specific group that was called Illuminati. That was a very common way to organize back in the day around the revolution.
I think you might find, say, for example, Rosicrucians having similar ideas, but at the end of the day, the interesting thing about the Illuminati was the way that it was leaked at the time. And it's, that looking at that book, the John Robeson book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, is probably the best way to.
Okay.
Anyway, I'm going to have to go now, but fascinating chatting. And if anyone is interested in following some of the stuff I do, we have a radio show every week on FM here in Bristol, which is on Bristol Community FM, BCFM, from 6 till 8 live every Friday, which you don't have to be in Bristol to pick it up because you can get it online. And so that's at thisweek.org.uk.
Where do we get it online?
thisweek.org.uk, you'll find it there. And then I also got a forum, the 9/11 forum, which looks into all sorts of assassinations, conspiracies and that sort of thing, and terrorist attacks as they happen. That's 911forum.org.uk. And then the classic Bilderberg.org, which is a domain name that I bought back in 1997.
Nice. You were early on. That's clever. So that's your site. Do you podcast your shows so people can get them?
Yep, it's all there. Yep, you can download them all.
So there's archives online.
Definitely. Well, probably far too much archives. But anything you want to go, I mean, for example, we did a thing on the Kennedy assassination, which has all been solved, by the way. David Atlee Phillips and the CIA and James Files actually fired the fatal shot. This stuff is all the truth is out there, folks. So
hang on, who should we talk with about the JFK thing?
Well, I would play an interview with James Files, which was done by he was the shooter. He was in the 82nd Airborne Division, so he was not the easiest guy to bump off afterwards, I would say. Wow. Whoever it was that shot JFK was almost certainly going to get a bullet in the head themselves not too long afterwards, because they might start talking. But he was trained by the 82nd Airborne Division, and he was out in Korea fighting, and so he wasn't a very easy guy to dispatch because he had a gun in his car the whole time, and then when they tried to kill him, he would start shooting back straight away. So he's a fascinating character.
This should be a movie.
And also, well, one day, hopefully. And also, of course, Madeleine Brown, who was Lyndon Johnson's girlfriend, has confessed everything, really, that happened the night before the assassination in Clint Murchison's house in Dallas. So I mean, which was Hoover. This is the FBI and everyone getting together basically for the conspiracy. But I mean, it was a tragic end to freedom, really, in the United States. And of course, something else that happened not long afterwards was the stopping the linking of the dollar to gold. And from then on, the whole thing started to slide into mafia-controlled, fascist-controlled tyranny.
Yep, and that's where we find ourselves today.
Well, we do. But, I mean, let's just keep on top of it, because a lot of the youngsters out there are very knowledgeable about some of this stuff, and they're very cynical. I think in my generation, when I was growing up, we weren't anywhere near as knowledgeable about hidden power as the young people are.
Thanks to the internet, they didn't see it coming. That's why they need to control it, right?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Nice. That's a wrap.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got to go. I've got to rush. Seriously, I've got.
Yeah. I send you the link when it's out. Okay.
Beautiful.
Take it from there.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you a lot, Tony, for your contributions today. It was a pleasure.
No problem. Anytime. Lovely talking to you. Thank you. Yeah. Some great questions. Really good. Yeah. Good grilling.
Great answers.
Okay.
Later.
Cheers.
Okay.
Cheerio, Al.
And that's our show tonight. Now, if you are puzzled about the cooperation between the surviving Nazi elite and emerging Zionist elite that overlaps in the 50s and the 60s, you have to understand that the world is not this simple false dichotomy that you're presented, and which is probably not more visible than in the mainstream political field of party politics, left-wing, right-wing. If you are one of the suckers who buys into that, okay, but you'll then probably also have a hard time understanding the complexities and nuances of real politics. So there is only two conflicts of interest in modern politics. That is the public, the people, on the one hand, the masses. It is all about the serfs, if you like, and you are one of them, whether you like it or not. And then there's the elite, we can call them whatever, the establishment. And that's how it is in every country. So you better grow up and start realizing the adult perspective. So when Hitler was out of the equation, obviously it was much more easier for the surviving Nazis to, the old saying, if you can't beat them, join them. So we have a conglomerate of the intel, the emerging of the corporations, the Nazi elite, and the Wall Street, City of London crowd, as we have uncovered in so many shows. And we're starting to address this peculiarity now because we have reached that part of the timeline where it becomes relevant. I mean, many people are about, why aren't you covering Israel and Zionism? Well, we haven't gotten to it yet. And usually they ask because they are partisan and are just bothered by the facts. But if you can't handle the facts, then you may want to revise your partisanship. I mean, being 100% on board with an ideology or a political identification is very, very stupid. Honestly, you are then a tool. Nothing less, nothing more. It's not natural. It's not natural to be 100% agreeing with anything if you are an independent thinker, which too few are, but we hope we can wake up people with these shows, because if we are to have anything but a gloom future, people need to start thinking for themselves. I want to quote a project that Tony worked on called Then the Panzers, Now the Banksters, where he speaks on the problems with mainstream media and the importance of independent media at the State and Corporate Crimes Against Democracy conference in London in 2012. So much emphasis is placed on select Jewish participation in Bormann companies that when Adolf Eichmann was seized and taken to Tel Aviv to stand trial, it produced a shockwave in the Jewish and German communities of Buenos Aires. Jewish leaders informed the Israeli authorities in no uncertain terms that this must never happen again, because a repetition would permanently rupture relations with the Germans of Latin America as well as with the Bormann organization and cut off the flow of Jewish money to Israel. It never happened again. And the pursuit of Bormann quieted down at the request of these Jewish leaders. This was highlighted already by Manning, the CBS News correspondent, in his book Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. So it's nothing new. We've seen how the Fourth Reich has emerged, consisting of old-school Nazi elite, Anglo-American oligarchs and Zionists. And, like I said in the show, nowhere more visible today than in the axis of evil counting the hijacked states of US, Israel and Saudi Arabia. And until these regimes fall, the world will not know anything close to peace, prosperity or harmony. If you enjoy our shows, remember to subscribe. We get frequently comments from people who just discovered us and asks why we have so few subscribers. And what can I say? Maybe it's because we usually do long form. In this day and age, people have their attention span ruined by the MSM. Maybe it's because we do conversational. Many people don't want to hear a discussion. They want to hear prescribed one-liners with an artificial lecture in reply, again because they're conditioned by the MSM. Maybe it's my weird accent, although I hear some think it's cute. Maybe it's because we do not do commercial considerations, even if we luck out sometimes and some shows take off. It surprises us as much as anyone. So we do passionate follow our ideals of why we're doing this show. And that hurts, of course, the numbers and the wallet. Maybe it's because we don't release frequent shows, much due to the long form format. I mean, the algorithm is rigged against that, and it rewards people who releases new shows all the time. And of course, probably mainly because if you look at YouTube today, it is a refuge, it's a retirement home for the mainstream channels. They are tanking in the old stream outlets, and so you probably noticed they're all invading YouTube now, facilitated by YouTube, who's owned by Google, who is in bed and owned by these same conglomerates that own the old stream media. So it's just one hand facilitating the survival of the other hand. This is how they do it. Tony said it in the show, hostile takeover. So they took over YouTube, and gradually they have to squeeze out all independent channels. They can't do it overnight because they need all the people who are active on YouTube U. So one way they do it is unsubscribing people from independent channels. I don't know if that's what's going on with us, but we have lost 8,000 subscribers. And then they force subscribe people to mainstream channels. But more effectively, they shadow ban and demonetize a lot of shows. This will probably happen to this one too, although we haven't breached one single of their so-called ad-friendly policy points. And if you take a look at the right side of the channel where they advertise for other shows, it used to be, at least half of them used to be our shows. I mean, on the list of recommended shows from one of our shows. And then it used to be relevant, other shows that were relevant to whatever we covered in that main show where the recommended videos appear. But today, you'll see, if you're lucky, there's probably one other of our shows, usually none. And then there's a bunch of mainstream, like 90%. And it's not, of course, not just at our videos, this is across the board. So this is one of the ways to do it. And I think we're closing up to, everybody's talking about the new crack coming. And I think we can smell it. We've lost half our subscribers, sponsors lately, for no good reason, because we've been active as ever before. I think it's people feeling it in their wallet. So look out for that. But you don't have to pay us a dime to support us. Subscribe and remember to click the bell, as they always say, otherwise you won't get notified. And share our shows. The algorithm picks up sharing across the board at all social platforms, not just YouTube, and then hypes it further. So if you're going to have any chance for shows like this one to be spread, the algorithm has to believe it's spreadable, which you can help contribute to by sharing it. And remember to mention us to people. So many people haven't heard of us. We have not reached anything near the potential of our target audience. It's just word of mouth that can do it, especially now that we don't get any pull from YouTube. And, of course, we're preparing for the day they're going to force us out. So we have a present at normal podcast platforms. You find us at most of them. And we're also going to experiment with some other platforms similar to YouTube in the future. That's it. Thanks for hanging in there and bearing with us. I'm your host Al, solely due to my team and your support. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?